Good morning, Jasper Municipality Administration Council and representatives from the Chamber and the gallery. Today we're May 12th, 2026. We're meeting for Committee of the Whole meeting. I'd like to call to order. Any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, I'd like someone to make a motion for approval of the agenda. Councillor Waxer? All in favor? Moving on, is there any business arising from the minutes of April 28th Committee of the Whole meeting? Seeing none, looking around, I see no delegations wish to speak. And is there any correspondence? On to 7, new business. 7.1, Mayor's Award Policy. And I'll look to Director Nadon.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We're bringing this revised Mayor's Awards policy to Council following in March of 2026. It was the latest round of the Mayor's Recognition Awards, and Council requested administration look into adding opportunities for youth to be recognized and getting awards under that policy. So that was the main driver behind why we brought this policy back. But it was also one of those policies that was a bit dated, and we took the opportunity to bring it closer to what our other policies are. So there's a bit more content in the body of the policy itself. And in order to meet Council's direction with the youth category, our legislative coordinator worked with the youth and teens outreach worker to make sure that we had a process that would be well received by the youth. And so you will see that that has been added to the policy statement. And the administrative procedures are not included in this package. Those are to be approved by the CAO, and they cover items that are more administrative in nature, such as nominations and advertising and how administration brings the information to Council. And essentially, the biggest change is that's it. The policy statement is more fulsome, has more content to it, but also the award categories were added to the actual body of the policy. So if Council wanted to change that, that could be possible. And essentially, under the Mayor's Recognition Awards, we kept the same categories, which are athletics, fine and performing arts, distinguished voluntary service, and then we also added a youth award under the age of 18 for any of the above categories. So that's been selected and brought as a separate bullet to recognize Council's direction. And yeah, so there's the recommendation is that committee recommend Council, sorry, just a minute, I'm bumping around the pages. Committee recommend Council approve the Mayor's Awards policy. So we simplified the title a little bit, and there should also be another recommendation that is that committee recommend Council rescind policy B015 Mayor's Recognition Awards. So we're recommending that you support the new one, but also do the complete housekeeping item of rescinding the old one. I'm happy to take any questions.
Looking like there's no questions. Does anybody wish? Councillor Waxer?
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Concert. Through you, I just wanted to make the comment that I think this is an excellent addition, that we have youth in the community who make a significant difference through leadership or through volunteerism. And I think this they'll never stay in the youth category long enough to merit that kind of award. But I think it's something because of they'll age out of it. So I think length of service was a problem in our under our previous policy, and I think that this is an excellent step forward.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Conscript. I have a question for councillors before we get to a motion, rather than for administration. And I simply wonder whether we might consider the policy title and the naming of the award. To me, at least, it feels a little misleading to present it as the Mayor's Awards. Council is, except for the Mayor's Special Award, Council is the selection committee. And really, it's an award from the municipality of Jasper to recognize citizens in the community. So, just as a suggestion, there could be numerous names, but rather than the Mayor's Awards, it could be Council Awards, it could be Mayor and Council Awards, it could be the Municipality of Jasper Recognition Awards. Wow. I throw that out for the consideration of Council.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. Councillor Melnick.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb. Just in response, I would suggest that using the name Mayor's Special Awards and also the Mayor's Recognition Award, I think adds additional relevance as the individual who is our lead in the municipal council. And while council participates, I believe someone receiving the award, receiving it from the municipality is maybe not the same as the chief elected officer in the municipality presenting the award on behalf of council. I would prefer to see us remain with the Mayor's Recognition Award and Mayor's Special Awards.
Thank you, Councillor Melnick. And I agree with what you're saying. Personally, it's I find the Mayor's Award, although I do appreciate Mayor Ireland wanting to share that with us, I think the way it is personally now is really good. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Consrud. I also agree with Councillor Melnick and yourself. I think there's a certain significance and community pride attached to the Mayor Award title.
Thanks for that. Anybody else? So would anybody care to make a motion or has anything else to speak to? Councillor Waxer.
Yeah, I'm happy to make the motion that committee recommend council approve the mayor's award policy as presented.
All in favor? That's unanimous. Motion carried.
Sorry, I was pointing at you. I also wanted to make the motion that committee recommend council rescind the previous mayor's award policy, and I don't know what the number is. E015.
All in favor? And that's unanimous and motion is passed. Moving on, 7.2 green space vision. And who do we have speaking to that?
Good morning, Deputy Mayor. It's Isla Tanaka, one of the town planners. Can everybody hear me in council chambers? Yes? Okay.
Yeah, you bet.
Good
Carry
morning.
on.
Thank you. So good morning, Deputy Mayor and Council. On April 14th of this year, committee directed administration to circulate the existing 2003 Green Space Vision Plan to all of Council and have this matter returned to a future committee of the whole meeting. So we are sharing it with you today. In September 2002, the town established the Green Space Steering Committee to spearhead and oversee the preparation and implementation of the Green Space Vision Plan. The plan was presented to and received by Council for information on April 15th, 2003, with a recommendation to return on May 20th, 2003 for approval. Based on available records, however, the Green Space Vision Plan was never formally approved or endorsed by Council. It did, though, serve as a resource document for the 2011 Community Sustainability Plan. When we reviewed the plan and its key strategic priorities, we found that the municipality has completed projects in several priority areas. It is important to note that while many of its priorities have been implemented and the 2003 Green Space Vision Plan remains valuable as a historical reference, the community context, environmental considerations, and municipal priorities have changed significantly over the past 2 decades. We believe that preparing a new plan for green spaces would provide Council with an updated and coordinated framework to guide future decisions related to parks, trails, open spaces, and environmental management. Master plan documents of this nature are generally intended to guide decision-making over a 5 to 10-year horizon and are typically reviewed or renewed periodically to ensure they remain relevant and reflective of current conditions and community priorities. A new plan would allow the municipality to incorporate current considerations such as fire smart principles, climate adaptation, active transportation planning, accessibility, ecological management, and evolving community needs into a single strategic document. Developing an updated plan would also provide an opportunity for public engagement and help ensure future investments in green spaces are aligned with Council's strategic priorities and current operational realities. Therefore, we recommend that committee direct administration to refer the preparation of a new plan for green spaces to the 2027 budget discussion. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Isla Tanaka. And do we have any discussion or questions for her from Council? Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kongsrud, and through you to Ms. Tanaka. In the development of this plan or planning for this plan, I take it we would be working hand in hand with Parks Canada so that we are integrating both the plans in the park for areas close to the town site as well as tying into some existing infrastructure, similar to what was done in 2002.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Councillor Melnick, Parks Canada would certainly be a significant stakeholder in any engagement we did for a new green space open plan, yes.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Kongsrud. This was a long document, but a very interesting read with some historic names in there on the meetings. I also think this is a really good opportunity to work more closely with Indigenous partners as we rethink and rebuild our public spaces post-fire. Even though we are in a national park, these are municipal lands, and there's an opportunity to make those relationships more visible in everyday life throughout town, and that could look like Indigenous place naming and cultural gathering spaces, maybe more Indigenous art interpretations, teepees, storytelling, that kind of thing, and spaces that reflect the history of Jasper in a more visible way. We kind of have a blank canvas. I also think it's a really good opportunity to better connect the newly rebuilt Cabin Creek area to the rest of the community, whether that's through multi-use trails, bridges over Cabin Creek to connect Cabin Creek to the broader community.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hall. And to you, Councillor Waxer.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kongsrud. I wanted to just speak to what one thing that struck me as you spoke was the fire smarting element that we have now excellent guidelines around the built structure, but I think it would be very wise to also review fire smarting in our green spaces. So.
Thank you for that, Councillor Waxer. And to you, Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kongsrud. I'm not sure whether Ms. Tanaka is able to respond to this. I'm not sure whether Mr. Given is there. I think he is. So it might be better directed to him. I'm a bit uncertain about the breadth of the recommendation that's before us. I agree that it's worth while to again look at a plan for our green spaces, and it was really entertaining to read this historical document. I thought the section in particular about the historical development of the town was really good reading. There's a number of strong suggestions, and I see that back in 2003 we were still advocating for additional bicycle parking in the commercial core. There's lots to dig into here. I am wondering about the capacity limits of our staff and what exactly we might expect for 2027 budget discussions in line with the recommendation. If this is referred, if we are to refer the preparation of a new plan for green spaces to the budget discussions, does that imply that we will just talk about financing a plan, or would we expect to see a plan that soon? And I'm just unclear what administration is really proposing with the recommendation before us.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. And I see that you had your hand up, CEO Given.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Fischette and Council. You can hear I'm a little under the weather, so I decided better to be talking to you through Zoom than being in the room. Mayor Ireland, it's the first, so it is really, does Council wish administration to consider what the costs might be and to come back to you? We were not at all proposing that we would show up at budget discussions with a new plan. Undertaking a green space, a plan like this would have a fairly high level of public engagement, although there are some recent public engagements that we can incorporate and draw on, but it would have public engagement. And there's a cost associated to that in the development of a plan like this. And so the recommendation really is, if council would like us to do work on developing a new comprehensive plan like this, then we should probably come back to you at budget and tell you how much we estimate that would cost and give you some sense of that before you sort of just say, go ahead and build a new plan. That would be, so that's the intent of the recommendation, is that we would come back to you in the fall, tell you our estimate of what it would cost to build a plan like this and timelines. And then you can consider that cost in context with all the other budget requests and projects that would be in front of you for 2027 and beyond.
Thank you for that, Mr. Gibbon.
I was going to thank you, CEO Frechette, for that. Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Collinsrud, and through you to Ms. Tanaka again, or perhaps CEO Gibbon. We're in the middle of rebuilding an area in Cabin Creek where, as I looked at this green space plan, there were a number of items that were incorporated since this plan was introduced, including signage, trails, walking spaces, and so on. In our current redevelopment of Cabin Creek and other areas of town that were affected by the fire, are we maintaining those green spaces, many of which that were identified in this plan? And I guess how are we ensuring we incorporate the accessibility I think that Councillor Hall talked about regarding trails and bridges and so on?
Thank you, Councillor Melnick. Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Councillor Melnick. I actually I'm not the best person to answer this question. I'm not working directly on that piece. I'm going to pass it over to CAO Gibbon. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Isla. Deputy Mayor Kongsrud for Councillor Melnick. So at this point, administration has really been focused on supporting private landowners on their rebuilds. And then our secondary focus, as you'll see in the agenda, when we're thinking about public infrastructure, it really has been on core utilities and roads, sidewalks, and pipes. And so I think that there's still so there have been no changes to the amount of public space that's available in the Cabin Creek area. But I would say that our attention has been focused on other sort of core infrastructure and assets rather than the long-range planning of the green spaces and trail network. So administration hadn't planned on making any changes or any reductions by any means. And at the same time, it hasn't been at the top of the list as we've been supporting homeowners with their rebuilds, facilitating construction in the town site, and focusing on core utility infrastructure. So in a way, I think that presents a good opportunity for us that we can undertake some planning and ensure that when the municipality makes investments in reestablishing those open spaces, that we do it in a forward-looking way.
Deputy Mayor Kongsrud, thank you, Mr. Gibbon. I imagine that none of the private leaseholds have been changed or expanded, allowing what was existing as municipal green space and public areas. So I would anticipate moving forward that we probably would be able to enhance those with the type of thing that I think Councillor Frechette was referring to regarding benches and vistas and possible potentially public bike parking in areas that could be used for recreation.
Councillor Melnick, absolutely any of those types of things would be within the scope of the type of planning document that we're talking about. And as you can appreciate, some of those assets might be, if they were there before, might be covered under DRP. But some of the assets that we're talking about, or I think that people are thinking of, would be new assets, and would have to be things that would come through the regular budget process. So the idea, the sequence of events would be to engage the public on what they believe should happen, the stakeholders in the public, to bring a document like that to council. Council approves that document, and then that document sets the work for administration over the next number of years, both on the capital and operational side. And so this recommendation is to let us come to you in the fall and tell you how much we think that planning work will cost. And then that whole cycle, that process that I spoke about would happen. And ultimately you'd receive recommendations for projects and capital items potentially over the next number of years that would be as a result of the plan if council chose to fund the plan in the first place.
Thank you for that. Appreciate the additional information.
To you, Councillor Roger.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Conscript, and through to Mr. Given. I've been prepared to make a motion. I'm not happy with the wording. I think the wording that you've just given us is better in the sense that I think we should be referring administration to come up with a budget for new plan for green spaces to present at the 27 budget discussion. Something like that would be better for me, I think.
And Deputy Mayor Kongsrud for Councillor Roger, absolutely, administration presents recommendations. I think this would, as it's framed in the report, that's exactly what we would do, but they are council's motions. If you choose to make them, you can change the wording, adapt it however you see fit, to make sure that everybody understands what the intent is. From administration's perspective, our suggestion is that you give us some space to come back to you in the fall and tell you how much it would cost to build a plan like this. And however you wish to word it, obviously administration's happy to take council's direction on that.
Thanks for that, CAO Givens, and to you, Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kongsrud. I wonder if administration will explore partnerships or grant opportunities. I know that we have a FCM conference coming up, and there's that Green Municipal Fund. I wonder if this would fall in line with that, maybe alongside Indigenous partner components and potential cultural funding streams as well. But I know this might be an opportunity for us at FCM conference to chat with those that are part of the Green Municipal Fund.
And did you make a motion, Councillor Roger, or to you, Mayor Ireland?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Conscript. Based on my earlier comments and Mr. Given's response and Councillor Rogers' comments, I do have a motion that I'll present in a second if everybody else is done with their comments. I did want to, though, first confirm with Mr. Given the ongoing intent arising from Councillor Melnick's earlier question, and that is, I take it that as, say, Cabin Creek and the R4 district is redeveloped, even though our priorities are with other components of public infrastructure and assisting private leaseholders with their developments, the intent would be that, say, corridors through the R3, or pardon me, the R4 district and Cabin Creek would at least be maintained, that the riparian zone would be maintained. And even though we're not expending funds necessarily on attributes to those spaces, they will be maintained. And we have been working over the last number of years to reclaim as public lands where some leaseholders had encroached on them. And so with the opportunity of a rebuild, we have an opportunity to realign all the fences on property lines to where they should be, so that that public space will be available for whatever additional facilities we might want to add in the future. And I think it's a given, but Mr. Given can confirm that it's a given.
Thanks, Mayor Ireland. So yes, absolutely it is. So the shape of leases, by and large, has remained the same. Maybe there's some cases that I can think of that are a bit unique, where the leaseholders engage with parks to do something different. But so that the amount of public space that there was before is the same amount and same configuration of public space that there will be following the rebuild. And absolutely, where there were leaseholds that were not in conformance with what was defined in the leasehold documents with Parks Canada, they are being brought into conformity. We're bringing them into alignment. If somebody had gone outside the bounds of their lease, a part of their development permitting process with Parks would be that the development stays on their lease. And administration is working hand in hand with Parks on a couple of unusual situations where we saw encroachment, and we're using the tools that are available to us to affect change, to reclaim public space that had been claimed by others.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon. And subject to any other questions, Deputy Mayor Consrud, I am prepared with a motion. My motion would be that committee direct administration to refer the financial costs and available grant funding of the preparation of a new plan for green spaces to the 2027 budget discussions.
Thanks for that. All in favor? Carried. Moving on to 7.3 visitor paid parking revenue policy. And I believe Director Melanchek will speak to that, or CEO Given.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Consrud. Administration is here following up on an item from the motion action list. Earlier this year, Council directed administration to develop a draft visitor paid parking revenue policy. And so we're here with that recommendation today. Briefly, Council will, and the community will know that we started visitor paid parking in 2021 as a pilot project. Over the years, the program has been refined and has grown. And similarly, Council has long had a reserves policy, which establishes guidelines for the management and allocation of reserve funds. We have a visitor paid parking, reserve fund that's described there. And in 2023, during the budget deliberations, administration discussed with Council the use of visitor paid parking revenue prior to Council's approval of that budget. And so we described a number of ways that we were going to apply the revenue from visitor paid parking. And Council approved the budget with that application of the revenue. And we've continued that approach onto successive years. More recently, there's been a desire to have more clarity on the application of visitor paid parking revenues and to increase the visibility for the public and for Council, as well as to allow Council an explicit choice about where they dedicate those revenues. So the attached policy is administration's recommendation of how to do that. And I'm happy to guide everyone through the attached policy at a high level. Essentially, the policy clarifies how visitor paid parking revenue will be used. It highlights that first and foremost, the visitor paid parking program should operate at no cost to the local tax base, so the actual operation of the paid parking program. And so this is the first expense that can be used, that can be funded by the paid parking program is its own operations. Administration's identified what eligible program costs may include as a bit of a cross section so that you can see that. Then after funding itself, the policy moves into section 3.2, which is sort of really the heart of it, where Council can describe what you believe visitor paid parking revenue should be dedicated towards. Administration has identified an approach that is largely consistent with what we're doing today and what was approved by Council in the 2023 budget. The first area that paid parking revenues could be dedicated towards would be debenture payments related to recreation infrastructure. In that 2023 budget discussion, administration highlighted to Council how debentures on the aquatic center portion of the renovation and on the activity center portion of the major renovation, the debenture payments are paid in part by visitor paid parking. So that's recommended to be continued. The next bullet is operational capital support for municipal public transportation services. Again, this is aligned with the paid parking, the parking, reserve policy, and is consistent with our operational practice since 2023, where a portion of the visitor paid parking revenue is shown in the transit and provides transit operating support. A new addition, recognizing something we believe we've heard from council, is that visitor paid parking revenues could be used to fund climate change and wildfire resiliency initiatives. This is consistent with what we've seen from our friends down south in Banff. They make this an explicit part of their program, and administration believed that that was a worthwhile use to incorporate into our program. And then finally, the final approved use would be the overall reduction of the general municipal property tax burden. I guess it could be said that any of the previous items, paying for recreation infrastructure debentures reduces the municipal property tax burden because taxpayers don't have to pay for those debentures. But for clarity, we wanted to spell that out in addition. And then the final section, 3.3, is about the allocation of the net revenue. So before we talked, 3.2 talks about what can you use the revenue for? And then 3.3 talks about how do you allocate that and how do you show how it's been allocated? Under 3.3, the allocation has to be approved by council through the regular annual budget process. So if council approved this policy, you could expect to see a bit more detailed discussion about visitor paid parking at the annual budget process. And in that presentation at budget, the policy identifies what administration is expected to prepare for council and have as a part of the public documents. And so the bullet points outline that administration would be expected to show council the projected revenue, the projected operating costs of the program, the projected net revenue available to be allocated to other uses, and then how administration would propose to allocate the net revenue among the approved uses that are identified before in section 3.2. And then finally, any planned transfers to reserves. So really, in a lot of ways, the proposed policy is making more explicit and more clear our current practice. And by having a policy on how the revenue is used, it allows council direct influence in those choices in a very clear and transparent way that you can adjust as you see fit. Deputy Mayor Kongsrud, I'm happy to answer any questions about the policy. I believe it's relatively straightforward. And ultimately, if council chose to approve the policy as is or with amendments, administration would enter the 2027 budget planning cycle with the guidance on how you wished us to use the revenues and how you wished us to present it to council and the community. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Roger.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kongsrud, and through to Mr. Given. I'm just wondering if this doesn't restrict us where we don't want to be restricted. So what I mean is that if there's something that comes up that we don't want to use tax dollars for, but we think it's something we want as a extra, I suppose, if it doesn't fit in the list you've got here, we can't do it. So I'm just wondering what the advantage of the restriction is to us.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor Kongsrud for Councillor Roger. So there's a bit of a balance there, Councillor Roger. On the one hand, we've heard from council and the community that there's a desire for more transparency and more consistency. And so, in order to have that, you need to spell it out. And so policy helps us do that. The approved uses section, council could choose to amend those approved uses to put in anything you want there. And I would say that the bullet point, the final bullet point that says reduction of the general municipal property tax burden, that pretty much is a catch-all. So if at budget time there is a project that council felt was important, but wished to fund using something other than property tax revenues, off the municipal tax base, you could direct administration to fund it using paid parking revenue, and that would have the effect of reducing the general municipal property tax burden. So that one is sort of the catch-all that gives you that flexibility. And then finally, I would say that in terms of council's authority or flexibility to allocate this, ideally we're making those allocations at budget time rather than sort of ad hoc throughout the course of the year. With additional transparency and consistency, maybe comes a little bit more constrained, but ultimately the policy has quite a bit of flexibility built into it, and council can choose to amend the policy at any time if you saw fit. So I'd say they're pretty light constraints, Councillor Roger.
All right. So you're saying there's a workaround. It seems a little non-transparent to have a workaround, but I'm not totally happy with it, I guess I would say.
I would like to, okay, go ahead, Councillor Hall. No, you go, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Consrud. I had that note as well, kind of similar to what Councillor Roger was saying. Just the last paragraph in 3.3, any surplus beyond approved allocations that go straight into the public transit or transport and parking reserve. I wonder if we want more flexibility to direct any extraordinary surpluses elsewhere in exceptional years. I also wonder if we wanted to add, I know during budget deliberations in the fall, we increased paid parking revenue to support community group funding, and it seemed to it was directly related. And I also wonder if the policy should acknowledge that visitor paid revenue helps offset the wear and tear demand visitors place on our infrastructure. Like, I know it's implied, but I don't think it isn't directly stated in the language. But I do support a revenue policy for visitor paid parking. I think it creates very clear transparency about where this revenue goes instead of just disappearing into general revenues.
Councillor Melnick.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Consrud. And the bullet point, I think both Councillor Roger and Councillor Hall refer to is actually specifically in our reserve policy regarding public transportation and parking reserves, that 100% of any revenue after expenses from municipally operated public transportation services shall be contributed to the reserve. In that, it also talks about amounts equal to 10% of paid parking revenue from the prior year should be contributed to the reserve. So I think we may be overriding a policy that we already have in existence with this new policy. Understanding when it says 100% of any revenue after expenses from municipally operated public transportation services shall be contributed to the reserve. So we're taking the public transportation, any surplus goes to the reserve, but also any surplus from just operating parking. And that was my concern when this was suggested, is that we'd be getting ourselves into a situation where we're restricting ourselves as to where the reserves can go. And the point that was brought up about using any excesses to reduce taxes seems to be, I'm going to use the word circumvented. I don't know if that's the right word, but it doesn't give council the flexibility at budget time to specifically use money from the transportation reserve to reduce taxes. It should be probably referred to in another reserve, in my opinion. The financial stabilization reserve, for example, might be an opportunity to take any sort of excesses from parking. So that gives us far more flexibility, I believe, to be able to use any excess funds from parking. Councillor Hall.
CAO Givens.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Kongsrud. So, Council, this is a great discussion and exactly why we bring these policies forward. If Council wished to amend that last paragraph in 3.3 to direct any revenue above, the allocations to the financial stabilization reserve, absolutely, that's something that you can do. You could just direct administration to make that amendment. If council wished to include additional approved uses of the net revenue under 3.2, absolutely, council could add another bullet point or bullet points identifying the things that you'd like to do there. There was the comment about the connection between municipal infrastructure, transportation service, climate resilience, financial, and the connection to visitor-facing services. I appreciate that that's true. And if council can see a good way to fit it in to make that connection a little bit more explicit, then absolutely. And at the same time, if we may want to be aware of the fact that we don't create a contradiction in sort of the purpose statement, visitor facing services, and then create too much flexibility or identify specific approved uses that are not as visitor facing as some others. Like that might be an area where we could be open to criticism. But ultimately, council is fully in charge of the policy. And you can either tell us to go away, administration to go away and bring back changes based on the discussion, or you can make specific changes with motions to make amendments and then recommend an amended policy forward to council for approval or consideration. But we're happy to take your direction either way. So I'm hearing the point about community group funding, the financial stabilization fund maybe being a better place rather than the public transportation and parking reserve. Totally fine. Those are things that I've captured. But if council wanted to make other specific changes, you can either do that at the table today, making motions and amendments, or have more discussion and ask administration to come back with a revised policy based on the discussion.
Councillor Roger.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Conscoot. I think it's a bit difficult to come up with something right on the spot here. I think we should put it off for a week or two and think about it, come back.
Thanks for that. If there's no more discussion, I'm gonna, Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Consgrud. Before we leave the subject, through you to Mr. Given, I would appreciate a bit of an explanation of the intended difference between 3.2 and 3.3. So 3.2 itemizes approved uses of net revenue, and 3.3 deals with the allocation of net revenue. And I'm unclear as to why there would be that difference. If we're going to allocate it to areas, then presumably it's for use in those areas. If we've already defined the uses, then I don't follow the need for the allocation. And so I wonder whether I am simply confused or whether there's a bit of redundancy in those two sections.
Deputy Mayor Kongsrud for Mayor Ireland. If council wanted to have, collapse the two sections, so you only have a 3.2 and it's longer, that's totally fine. But the difference, and maybe it's the title of 3.3 that's confusing, or that doesn't give enough clarity. 3.3 is really about how is administration expected to show council and the community the way that it's allocated. So not about what can you allocate it on. That's 3.2. 3.3 is how do we show that in a consistent way that's visible to the community and to council. And also, the second paragraph and the bullet points under 3.3 really get into what are we going to show? What is council going to receive for decision making, and what will the community see? So that's the second paragraph and the bullet points. The first point, though, right under the title, explicitly says that the allocation shall be approved by council. So it gets to council's authority, and council might choose to dedicate 100% of funds to an approved use, to a single approved use in 1 year. And maybe the next year they'd present 50% of the funds to one approved use and 50% of the funds to another approved use. So that's where the allocation may not always be consistent year to year. The approved uses generally would be consistent, but the actual allocation of how much goes to each approved use, in some years, you may not allocate anything to one of the itemized things above. So that was the thinking. If the description, in the title, calling it allocation of net revenue, maybe isn't clear enough, I could see where we could do an improvement there of describing the intent behind all of the things that follow. But that describes our thinking anyways, Mayor Ireland, when we drafted this.
Thank you for that. That does help. And so I might now suggest that rather than collapsing it, we in fact expand it. So I get the point that within the approved uses, council still gets an opportunity to allocate, but the reporting is a separate item and could potentially be listed separately. So we do, for all sorts of reasons, transparency in particular, I think, benefit from a clear reporting, not just of net revenue, but gross revenue and costs. And so within the policy, a separate section detailing the accounting process might be beneficial.
Thanks, Mayor Ireland. And on that, I'm going to say that we take a break. If anybody wants to get their thoughts together or put a motion together, and we will return at 10:30. Welcome back. Is there any further discussion to be had, or does anybody care to make a motion? Seeing nobody, we will refer. Oh, Councillor Hall.
If there is no further discussion, I'm ready to make a motion. I just want to make sure that there is no other discussion at the table. That committee direct administration to come back with a visitor paid parking revenue policy at a future committee of the whole meeting. And I hope that CO given can capture what we've discussed today around the table.
Thanks for that. All in favor? Unanimous. Carrying on, 7.4 housing reserve transfer. And that'll be Director Malinchik.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good morning to you and Council. Today, administration is requesting that Council recommend Council allocate the remaining amount of $876,185 in insurance proceeds received as a result of the 2024 Jasper Complex wildfire to the Housing Reserve Fund to support future rebuilding efforts. These funds relate specifically to the municipal housing asset located at 1251 Cabin Creek Drive, which was destroyed during the wildfire event in 2024. Following the loss, insurance claims were submitted through the municipality's insurance provider in accordance with policy requirements. Through the claim process, the municipality received a total insurance proceed at $890,985 associated with this housing asset. A small portion, approximately 14,800, was already utilized in 2025, leaving the remaining balance of 876,185 available for allocation. The Housing Reserve Fund was established to support the long-term sustainability, maintenance, replacement, and development of municipal housing infrastructure. Using this reserve for the insurance proceeds aligns with established municipal financial management practices and existing council policy. Allocating the insurance proceeds directly to the housing reserve ensures the funds are retained for their intended purpose, specifically rebuilding and restoring municipal housing capacity that was lost as a result of the wildfire. This approach also supports financial integrity in ensuring that the one-time insurance revenues tied to the loss of this capital asset are not absorbed into the general municipal revenue or used for unrelated operational purposes. Placing the funds into a dedicated reserve improves transparency and accountability, and it clearly identifies as the source and intended use for the funds and allows council to make future decisions regarding reconstruction, timing, scope, and project priorities in a deliberate and strategic manner. In addition, consolidating these funds within the housing reserve improves administrative efficiency by centralizing funding for future housing rebuild initiatives related to the wildfire recovery effort. From an organizational perspective, this recommendation supports the municipality's continued commitment to maintaining essential workforce and staff housing within the community and reinvesting the insurance proceeds into the housing infrastructure. Financially, this recommendation does not require any additional taxation or extended borrowing at this time, although we will be discussing that in the future budget discussions. The insurance funds have already been received by the municipality and are outside of the current operating budget. And overall, administration views the proposed allocation as prudent, transparent, and financially responsible approach to ensure that the insurance proceeds are preserved and used for their intended purpose. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Director Melanchek. And Councillor Rogers, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor, and through you to the Director. I'm in favor of that. I'm just wondering, how much do we have in our housing reserve fund right now, if any?
I can bring that up shortly. It was in my director's report last week, I believe, so I can bring that up and give you an update on that.
I have a question for you, Director Melanchek or CAO Given. So that means that we took a cash buyout. We weren't able to do a rebuild with the insurance we had, and not that we wanted to, but just kind of, we may have talked about this already as well, but I can't remember.
Deputy Mayor Kongsrud, maybe I'll take that one while Director Melanchek's looking up the numbers on the reserve. My understanding is that because the property was a rental property, it was not, owner occupied. We had a cash payout option, not a guaranteed rebuild option. So that's my understanding. But in any case, this provides a lot of flexibility for the municipality. And really the recommendation in the report here is essentially a process recommendation rather than that cash sitting in a holding account. It should properly sit in the reserve account. And I believe that this might have been a recommendation from our auditors just about the right way to handle this. So this really is a housekeeping process, doesn't change any financial matters other than where the proceeds are held. And to your question, my understanding was that we had the cash payout option because it wasn't an owner-occupied dwelling, and so it didn't have the guaranteed replacement value.
Thanks for that. And to you, Director Melanchek.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through to Councillor Rogers on the last question. what we had at the beginning of the year for the housing reserve in 2025 was 321,985,000, and with the transfers in and out throughout the year, as well as the recommended allocation that we're putting forward today, would bring that reserve to $1,233,150.
Thank you.
To you, Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Consgrude. Through you to either Director Malinchuk or CAO Given. In the recommendation before us, there's reference to the housing reserve. In policy, I think it's whatever it is, B112. The references to the community housing reserve. And I just want to be clear that there is only one reserve. And I appreciate that the intent of this transfer is to hold the money until we are prepared to rebuild something. What was lost was municipal housing. And is there a distinction in the mind of the public between community housing and municipal housing? So that the parameters in policy B112 say that the community housing reserve acts as a savings account to support future contributions toward the development and construction of new community housing projects. That sounds like the kind of Connaught Street project that is underway. It doesn't sound like municipal housing. Do we not care about that distinction, or should we be more precise about the purpose of setting aside this money in reserves? And is that the right reserve?
Deputy Mayor Consgrude, maybe I'll take that one. Similar to the last policy, and where we had a discussion about what reserve visitor paid parking revenue might go to, completely at council's discretion. So if council, I think administration identified this reserve because it has housing in the name. But if that's a concern about a lack of clarity, we have other reserves that this could be dedicated towards. We have our fixed asset reserve. And under the reserves policy, the purpose or guidelines for the fixed asset reserve is to support future large-scale projects for municipal buildings, machinery, equipment, and roads, sidewalks, parking lots, streetscape elements, grounds, cemetery. So this is more explicitly municipal infrastructure. And it specifically says municipal buildings. So a staff accommodation house or property would be a municipal building. So that could be an appropriate reserve. It could also potentially go into the financial stabilization reserve. My advice to council would be that of the three, the two best options would either be the community housing reserve or the fixed asset reserve. And the reason I wouldn't recommend the financial stabilization reserve is because it is our most flexible reserve. Council has called on it a number of times for a variety of different purposes. And I'd be a little bit concerned about having these funds that are intended for the reconstruction of the house inadvertently being siphoned off or depleted for other priorities. And there's more potential for that in the financial stabilization reserve. We don't tend to use the fixed asset reserve as frequently, and its uses are more constrained. So of the two new options, I would suggest the fixed asset reserve would probably be preferable to the financial stabilization reserve, but that choice is absolutely up to council.
Thank you for that, CAO Given. And I concur and was leaning toward the fixed asset reserve because it specifically deals with municipal assets for municipal purposes rather than community housing, which I think can be interpreted differently in the public.
Councillor Waxer.
Uh, Thank you, Deputy Mayor Consard. Thank you, and also thank you, Mayor Ireland, for your comment. I too was worried about that muddying of the water, so I appreciate that. So I'd be willing to make the motion that committee recommend council allocate $876,185 of remaining insurance proceeds for 1251 Cabin Creek Drive to the Fix Asset Reserve.
All in favor of that motion? Unanimous. Carried. Thank you, Director Malinchek, for that, and CEO Given. Going on to 7.5 Wildfire Utility Repairs, Phase 2, Water Utility Rehabilitation, and I see Director Olthoff is here to speak to that.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Kongsrud and Council. The request for decision before you relates to the second phase of wildfire-affected utility repairs. And the recommendation from administration today is a two-part recommendation, and that is that committee recommend council amend the 2026 capital budget to include the water utility repairs phase 2 project at an estimated total budget of $7,630,000 to be funded in part by the disaster recovery program and borrowing, and that committee direct administration to bring forward a borrowing bylaw when the actual project costs and disaster recovery program contributions are confirmed. Alternatives before you are that committee direct administration to complete repairs on a phased operational basis as funding becomes available, or that committee receive the report for information and take no further action. So, as committee will recall, 1 month ago, we brought forward, that is, administration brought forward a request for decision on phase 1 of the wildfire-affected utility repair program. That program was to replace curb stop valves in the neighborhoods of Cabin Creek, Lodgepole, and Mayette. That request for decision was then carried forward to council, which approved the recommended amendment to the capital budget, and I can report that that work is actually beginning today. So phase 1 is underway, and what is under consideration today is phase 2. Phase 2 of this work includes the same type of replacement of curb stop valves in the neighborhoods of the 700 block of Connaught, 700, 800, and 900 blocks of Patricia Street, and the 800 block of Geeky Street. It also includes the refurbishment of water and sanitary mains through pipe bursting and cure-in-place lining of those mains in those neighborhoods, and surface works, which will be required to repair the surface affected by the digging and disruption that work requires. The recommendation before you is to fund this work through a combination of DRP funding and debenture borrowing. At this stage, administration's estimate is that approximately $2 to $4 million of this total budget will be eligible for coverage through the disaster recovery program, with the remainder requiring additional funding and, as is recommended, through debenture borrowing. The advantages of debenture borrowing to cover these costs are that it will allow these costs to be distributed over time and recuperated through utility rates. It will allow the municipality to retain the utility reserve to fund other planned infrastructure projects as described in the utility master plan. It will also allow us to continue pursuing grant funding through both the Government of Alberta and the Government of Canada to cover those costs that are not included under the disaster recovery program. And pending the identification and securing of grant funding and clarifying the amount of this project that will be covered through the DRP, An eventual borrowing bylaw will be revised to reflect the actual borrowing needs for the project. With respect to other alternatives for this work, if the work were not to carry forward immediately and happen over the course of the coming building season, we could expect a number of potential or prospective results which would include increased costs for the work, mostly resulting from inflation, reduced efficiencies for the work. One of the major advantages of carrying forward immediately with the work is the ability to coordinate with the other rebuild and utility work that is ongoing. That includes some utility work that will require surface works, and so there's an opportunity for cost sharing in some of those surface works elements of the project. And overall, prolonged operational risk, because again, we are dealing with some end-of-life cycle infrastructure, particularly the water and sanitary mains, and any delay in this work will carry risks of failure in that infrastructure going forward. And the overarching risk, I think, that drives much of this project is that rebuilt homes will have to reconnect to this infrastructure. And that process of connecting many new homes to the aging end-of-life cycle water and sanitary mains carries significant risk of failure of those mains with knock-on effects for residents who have recently rebuilt homes. As with the Phase 1 request for decision, there are a number of areas where this work intersects with strategic priorities identified by Council. Inclusion considerations include that restoring reliable water infrastructure supports safe and equitable access to essential municipal services for all residents. And to reiterate, the financial component of this project is an estimated total project cost of $7,630,000. That is for the Phase 2 project. And once again, to reiterate, the recommendation is to fund that work through a combination of the disaster recovery program and debenture borrowing to be recouped over time through utility rates. I am, of course, available to take any questions, as is Director Malinchuk and CAO Given. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Director Olthoff, and you, Councillor Roger.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Constern, through to Director Olthoff. It's quite a difference between 2 and 4 million, and the word may is in there. I'm just wondering how solid it is that we could get $4 million. If it's something that's absolutely sure, it makes a difference to us. If it's not, then it, of course, adds a lot more significance to the borrowing bylaw.
Through you, Deputy Mayor Congswood, to Councillor Roger. A great point. As with all of this work, we try to be very conservative in our estimates. Our expectation is that a large portion of this work will be eligible for DRP funding. It is just the fact that the functioning of the DRP program is that we need to provide evidence of the direct damage to the infrastructure as we go along. And so for purpose of being prudent, we offer a conservative range, but the expectation is that that the DRP eligibility will be on the higher end of that range. Also, it should be clarified that the estimate of $7.63 million for the total cost of Phase 2 of the project is, again, a conservative approach to estimate. We expect the total cost of this project will likely be significantly less than that, but we need to, for reasons of contingency and to ensure that we don't underestimate the project, begin with a larger estimate of total project costs. Again, the expectation is that the total cost will be significantly less than $7.63 million, and that DRP eligibility will be on the higher end of that $2 to $4 million range.
Just a follow-up question. If we approve this, is this a final approval, or is it contingent upon getting final figures from you? In other words, if we approve the $7 million and it turns out to be wholly funded by the town, it would make some difference to us than if it was, in fact, $4 million coming. So can we do this in 2 stages, dependent on what the funding is going to be, or does it have to be a all or nothing approval?
Again, through you, Deputy Mayor Congsford, to Councillor Roger, there is inherently a two-step process involved here. So moving through with this recommendation would cause the amendment to the capital budget, which would allow the work to go forward. But before we could finalize that and move forward, we would have to bring forward the borrowing bylaw, which would clarify the final figures and clarify the amount that the municipality would have to cover for the project. So if in the event we learned that grant funding was not forthcoming, that the DRP coverage of the project was less than we anticipated, that would come before committee and council again at the point of bringing forward the borrowing bylaw, and that would be an opportunity to again revisit the decision.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Thank you.
Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Consrud, and through you to Director Olthoff. In your last comment, you almost addressed what I was going to ask, and we were talking about the contingency of grant funding perhaps being available or not available. If we were to approve a borrowing bylaw for a dollar amount that we're comfortable with, if potential grant funding was to be available subsequent to that, can we apply for those grants? And I'm going to use the word retroactively, and will the funding bodies allow us to recover some of those costs for whatever the dollar amount the borrowing bylaw will need to be not covered by DRP?
Thank you, Councillor Melnick. Through Deputy Mayor Congsrud to Councillor Melnick. In terms of our ability to pursue grant funding sort of after we've begun moving forward with the project, absolutely that is something we would intend to do, and we would do that in order to offset any costs that were incurred to the municipality for the project. In terms of the process and technicalities of amending the borrowing bylaw at that point in the game, I am going to defer to Director Malinchuk.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, through to Councillor Melnick. In the past, we have actually had to amend borrowing bylaws. So, for instance, servicing of lands actually came in lower than anticipated than what we had budgeted. We had done the borrowing bylaw. In the end, we came back and amended it to what we actually needed to borrow. And we did not borrow more than we needed to borrow at that time.
I guess maybe more specifically to grant funding, once the borrowing bylaw goes, are you referring specifically that grants that could be available that could then bring the borrowing bylaw down? In other words, if we weren't able to get a grant before the bylaw and then grants become available 6 months later, can we apply for those grants to reduce again later the borrowing bylaw?
Deputy Mayor, through to Councillor Melnick, I believe it depends on the grant and which one is being applied for, on whether or not they would allow that to occur. Specifically, what I was referring to is that the contract actually came in under budget from the initial budget estimate. So that is what we've experienced in the past from my experience. But yes, I do think that it depends on the grant and what they would allow. Because there's certain talks already beginning with DRPs, so that's already in works, and they are aware. So that's possibly different than sourcing other grants to assist in the funding of the project. So I think that this would also be, discussed and brought up with the funding provider as well.
Thank you for that additional clarity.
Deputy Mayor Congsrud, if I could.
You can.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, it's awkward. I can't raise my hand like when I'm in the room. What administration is intending to do here is essentially, we can't move forward with any capital project if it isn't reflected in council's approved capital budget. So that's the first part of the recommendation, is to get this into council's approved capital budget. And then that would allow us to start the tendering process, potentially begin the work, and continue to seek grants and other funding as possible, including clarifying with DRP and getting a final revision of what their contribution will be. And it does happen from time to time where the municipality will start an approved capital project, but won't initiate the borrowing until more clarity comes on how much we need to borrow. So, I mean, in essence, we don't go and borrow all the money for an approved capital project, January 1st, just because the year goes to the year that the capital project was approved for. There's a level of work that goes into refining so we can ensure that we don't ever borrow more than we need. Director Malinchuk can maybe endorse how that's happened in the past, but it is not, well, it's not completely common. I wouldn't say we do it on every project. On large projects, administration does have some flexibility to manage the borrowing, so we ensure that we're not borrowing excessively or borrowing more than we need. And part of doing that is delaying the borrowing, the actual bringing forward the borrowing bylaw and making the borrowing until when the project costs are more known. So what we're attempting to do here is highlight the need to add this to the capital budget at the total maximum expected amount. And I think Director Olthoff, shared, we expect it to be significantly under that amount, and we expect DRP to cover a meaningful, a material amount. So the borrowing, could easily be $2 million or $3 million less than that total amount or more. But we don't want to give you, we need to give you clear advice that this is the maximum total exposure to the municipality is that 7.6. The alternatives would be that, council could choose to direct administration to go and confirm total exact project costs and total exact external funding. And that could take a number of months, which would mean that we may miss this construction season. So there's some uncertainty and some risk, to be completely transparent, so council and the community can understand that. Administration believes that it's manageable risk, and that what we would ultimately come forward with a borrowing bylaw would be significantly less than the total estimated project budget that you see in the RFD.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Consgrove, through you to Director Olthoff or to CAO Given. Once, assuming that council does amend the capital budget, once there is an amount in the budget, does that free administration to commence with work on a case-by-case basis? I can't recall the cost of a single curb stop, but there is construction of residential housing proceeding and people will need those connections. We want to take advantage, as you said, of the current building season. Once there is an approved capital budget, and regardless of a borrowing bylaw, is administration able to proceed with necessary repairs without further council approval just to get the immediate needs covered?
I'll through you, Deputy Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Consgrove to Mayor Ireland. The estimated project costs before you refer to the totality of the work, including all the efficiencies that are gained through that work. So the first point I would make is that if the work were to proceed on a case-by-case basis, addressing needs as they arise, the total cost of the project would be significantly different than what's before you now. Not exactly the question you asked, but just to put that out there. As to whether administration could move forward with work as needed on a case-by-case basis, first point I would make there is that has already been happening with respect to houses that are being rebuilt in fire-affected neighborhoods. And to the second point of whether this particular capital project being added to the budget would allow for that case-by-case work to continue, I'm going to have to say that I actually don't know the answer to that question, and so I will defer to CAO Given for that answer.
Yeah. Mayor Ireland, I think what you're hearing from administration is that the appropriate way to proceed with this project is in a comprehensive manner. If you think about the basic nature of a water main or a sewer main, deciding to replace 5 meters of it this week and then 3 weeks later replacing another 5 meters down the block somewhere else is highly inefficient and causes more disruption. So what administration is recommending here is that if council supports doing this work at all, other than in that ad hoc sort of nature, that it should be done in a comprehensive approach, because the disruption to residents, the disruption to residents would be much higher, costs would be much higher, and the risk of failures would sort of continue rather than having a clear sort of endpoint. So, is it possible? Yes, it's possible. Is it recommendable? Not from administration's perspective. And if council wished to direct administration to continue to follow these on a case-by-case basis or a phased approach, which is the second alternative, that's something that is technically possible, but there's a reason that it's not the recommended approach.
Thank you for that. Would it make a difference if the funding sources included DRP funding, borrowing, and reserves? I don't want the process to get in the way of the work. And the process, particularly if we're talking about a borrowing bylaw, has some steps that we cannot avoid, and that drags out the time. And we're already into the building season. So I just want from this side of the table to best understand how, if we're prepared to go ahead with the amendment to the capital budget, and I'm just speculating right now, that doing that does not slow down the necessary work.
Deputy Mayor Kongsrud.
For you, Deputy Mayor Kongsrud.
Sorry, Doug. Mayor Ireland, I'll just say, if you wanted, it would be helpful to add reserves as a potential funding source that would give administration more flexibility and more confidence. That's so in the main motion where it talks about to be funded in part by the disaster recovery program and borrowing, to add and reserves would be fine. Again, we may find that the ultimate funding is 0% reserves and 50% DRP, but that would give more flexibility. And explicitly, administration should committee and ultimately council approve this amendment to the capital plan, administration is planning on moving forward to initiate the work, so we're not holding it up, waiting for the third passage and third reading and certification, all those other steps that are required around a borrowing bylaw.
Good. Thank you for that. I was hoping for that answer. Sorry, don't let me interrupt.
If I may, again, through you, Deputy Mayor Kongsrud, to Mayor Ireland, just to add one note on timelines, is that, as I mentioned, the work for phase one is beginning today. That work involves a considerable mobilization of machinery and contractors to do that work. And with the current timeline that we have laid out, beginning this process with committee today, we would anticipate that initiating this work would align well with the completion of phase one work, allowing the full scope of work to proceed through the current building season without a considerable period of overlap of the two phases of work, which would be quite disruptive to the community, and allowing for the scope of work to be completed before the end of the construction season. So again, while the point about delaying things with process is absolutely a valid one, we do anticipate, with the timeline we've laid out, as the recommendation indicates, we would be able to proceed with the full scope of work this construction season.
Thank you. And I did signal that I had a second question, although maybe now it's a third question. That question is there any prospect that to the extent we do need to borrow money for this, that borrowing can be exempted from our debt limit? I thought we had heard some discussion along that line earlier, but I might be misremembering.
Deputy Mayor Kongsrud, I can take that question. Administration is exploring that potential, Mayor Ireland. And so we have had a couple of meetings with the Department of Municipal Affairs, who are in charge of that regulation. And Council will remember that we are in our budget discussions, we present a normalized debt capacity to you, because we don't want to give the impression that we think that we have a whole bunch of debt capacity that ultimately will come off as extraordinary funding declines. So we have to make a bit of a case to the province about because by the technical measure that the province would do it, we have capacity for this, so they're not concerned. But that is an avenue that we're following. And if necessary, so it wouldn't change the amount of borrowing that would be required. It would just change what impact, if any, that borrowing would have on the municipality's overall debt capacity under provincial rules. But we are having those conversations with the province at the administrative level.
Thank you.
Councillor Roger.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Conscript. Sorry. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Conscript, and through to either Mr. Given or Mr. Olthoff. My question is the timing. We're starting the work. We don't know exactly how it's going to be funded. How soon do we find out whether the DRP or the other grants, is this going to be a month or two, or is it going to be right to the end of the summer? What do you think?
Through you, Deputy Mayor Kongsrud, to Councillor Roger. So with respect to the DRP, it's essentially a two-step process. The first is establishing an estimate of the coverage of the DRP. And the second process is actually retroactive. So it will require the work to be completed and to provide visual evidence of the damage to the infrastructure in order to secure DRP reimbursement of the costs. So working with engineers at the province of Alberta, we can refine an estimate of the portion of the work that will be covered by DRP, but a final figure of DRP coverage won't be available to us until the work is complete and the evidence of damage can be presented to DRP. That will include estimates, for example, of the surface works, what percentage of those relate to fire-affected utilities, and what relates to simply aged or obsolete utilities. So again, two-step process, first of arriving at a refined estimate of DRP eligibility, and then a final figure that we'll have to wait until the work is complete. With respect to the grant funding portion of what might be funded, we are currently in conversation with partners in both the Government of Alberta and the Government of Canada on the availability of grant funding and are moving those processes forward. It is difficult to anticipate exactly when final answers might be provided, but we have advanced those conversations. So we would anticipate having clarity on grant funding within the frame of time that the work is proceeding over the next weeks and months. But again, because we don't control the allocation processes for those grants, and for the most part, they are ongoing granting processes without specific deadlines and allocation dates, there's still some uncertainty as to the exact timing of that.
So my understanding is that the DRP you're saying is certain we're going to get it, but we just don't know how much. Is that fair enough?
Through Deputy Mayor to Councillor Roger, that is correct. We can arrive at good estimates, but final figures will have to wait until the work is complete.
Councillor Waxer.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Consrud, and through you to CAO Given. I've been reading this and wondering whether the the motion should read the wildfire utility repairs and refurbishment of aging water and wastewater infrastructure, because it seems to me that it's both. It's not only wildfire repairs, it's also the refurbishment of the aging infrastructure. And that might explain to the public why there would be elements that would not be covered by DRP.
Deputy Mayor Congsrud for Councillor Waxer. I think that might be fine. I would be a bit cautious about that because we certainly need to make a case to DRP that the reason that we need to do this work now is because of the wildfire. Had the wildfire not happened, we might have done sections of this work over the course of the next 5 to 7 years. The reason that there's a need to do it all now is because of the wildfire, because people are rebuilding their homes. So, and I would not want to send mixed signals to the province that this is only because we're trying to do a life cycle renewal of infrastructure. So I think I would probably come down on maintaining the wording as is. Because we very clearly can make a case that the reason to do this now is as a direct result of the wildfire. It's about how much of that we can convince the province to accept versus, their view that, well, you're going to replace these anyways. And I wouldn't want to give any more grounds for them to say, well, we're going to cover less.
Thank you very much for that clarity. That makes a lot of sense.
Thanks for that. And I'm going to recommend that we take another 5-minute break if anybody wishes to put a motion together, or to you, Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Congsrud. If there are no other questions, I'm prepared to make a motion now. That committee recommend council amend the 2026 capital budget to include the wildfire utility repairs phase 2 project at an estimated total budget of $7,630,000 to be funded in part by the Disaster Recovery Program /HARP, borrowing and reserves, and that committee direct administration to bring forward a borrowing bylaw when actual project costs and disaster recovery program contributions are confirmed.
Thanks for that. All in favor? Unanimous. Motion carried. And on that, we're on to the motion action list. Does the committee approve the updated motion action list? And I'll have to ask, do we need to make a motion on that?
Deputy Mayor Congsrud, just a couple of notes that aren't captured in the one that's included in your package. So administration is recommending deferring the recovery advisory terms of reference to June. So that's just moving that date from May to June. And then there are actually 4 items on the second page that we believe could be removed. That some will be replaced by new action from the meeting, but the visitor paid parking revenue policy was delivered today. There was a new update and more direction given, which would replace the item from back in March. The mayor's awards item could be removed. The water services bylaw, you'll see that we were recommending to remove that one. That's been through the council process. And then the green space vision plan, the direction from April 14th has been completed. Again, some of those would be replaced by new action or new direction from the committee today, but those items could be removed. And so those are the recommended changes to the motion action list.
Thanks for that. Councillor Melnick.
I was about to make the motion to receive the, let me put this differently, to approve the updated motion action list as recommended by administration.
Thank you. All in favor? Unanimous. And moving on, Councillor, upcoming meetings. That's on the municipality webpage, or if anybody has anything to add, Councillor Melnick.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Consrud. I'd like to just mention a couple of upcoming meetings. One is the Alberta Japan Twin Municipalities Association Conference in Lacombe on the 22nd and 23rd of May that both Councillor Frechette and myself will be attending. And just before our next Committee of the Whole meeting on the 25th of May, there is a Prairies Chapter Climate Caucus Zoom meeting. I try to attend those when I can, just for additional information regarding the activities in the prairies as it relates to this particular caucus.
Thanks for that. And Mayor Ireland?
Currently, there is an affordable housing conference happening in Edmonton. I think our staff is representing the municipality there. I am going to be in Edmonton anyway, so I am booked to be in studio with Ryan Jesperson on Real Talk tomorrow morning, talking about affordable housing and also connected to the Climate Caucus work with respect to housing. And I am in Edmonton in any event to speak at the Canadian Risk and Hazard Network Symposium on Thursday morning.
Councillor Waxer.
Yes, I just wanted to report, this is not upcoming, but past. I attended a number of uplift events over the weekend and earlier, and would just like to offer a commendation to those involved in the Uplift festival, that it is a tremendous gift to the community, and that I encourage everyone to take a mural tour and see the new murals. They're absolutely amazing.
Thanks for that. And to you, Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Consrud. I will be, and again, this isn't an assigned committee, further to Councillor Melnick's comment about the Prairies Chapter Climate Caucus on the 25th. It is a Zoom meeting that will be noon Mountain Time, and I will be speaking and sharing lived experience as a elected local leader.
Thank you for that. And that leads us to upcoming events, which Councillor Melnick has already let us know he's going to attend. And we have the 58th annual Jasper United Church Spring Plant Sale from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on May 29th and 30th at the Jasper Yellowhead Museum and Archives, and as well the Federation Canadian Municipalities Annual Conference, June 4th to 7th. And after that, we have item 11. Councillor Melnick.
I may have just got in slightly before his worship, but I was going to mention NETMA, but if you'd like to go ahead. Okay, so on the 20th of May, there will be a gathering of NETMA, and it'll be at Earl's. And 4:30, I believe, is the start time.
Thank you for that, Mayor Ireland.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention before we conclude that today is International Nurses Day. It is Florence Nightingale's birthday. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to give a shout out to all the hardworking nurses that keep the health of our community intact, and thank them all.
Thanks for that. And does anybody else care to make a motion of any sort? Mayor Ireland.
I will make a motion that there be no further business. The committee of the whole meeting of May 12th, 2026 be adjourned at 11:22 a.m.
All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you.